Well, there are indeed many parts of the late UN scribe Kofi Annan. And to discuss this further, I'm now being joined by a former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Chief Emeka Anyaoku. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on the news at 10 at this time. You served as the Commonwealth Secretary General at the time that Kofi Annan was UN Secretary General. What was it like working with your counterpart in the United Nations?
Well, Kofi Annan and I worked very closely together. He became Secretary General of the United Nations almost 7 years after I had been in office as Commonwealth Secretary General. But he and I worked together for the remaining 3 years before my retirement in the year 2000. By Kofi Annan's death, the world, and in particular Africa, has lost a true global statesman and peacemaker. He left indelible legacy at the United Nations. I mean, his achievements as UN Secretary General are many, and if I may just mention a few. Kofi, when he became Secretary General, effected the most far-reaching reform of the United Nations Secretariat administrative structure. And he, as Secretary General, led the movement that resulted in a global summit that adopted the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000. And Kofi, against the background of the genocide in Rwanda and in Srebrenica in Eastern Europe, saw to it that the UN General Assembly adopted a very historic resolution named Responsibility to Protect. And the purpose of this resolution was to empower the global body to intervene in countries where populations face a serious threat of genocide or serious abuse of human rights. And Kofi Annan also brokered peace in many parts of the world. Some successfully, others not so successfully because of the intricacies of the issues he had to deal with. For example, he was in Myanmar, perhaps popularly known as Burma, to deal with the conflict between the Buddhist majority and the Rohingya Muslim minority. That was not a successful trip, but the world applauded him for his effort there. And in Nigeria, Kofi Annan and I came together in 1998 at the invitation of the then head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, to discuss how the United Nations and the Commonwealth could contribute to Nigeria's return to democracy, which happened the following year. And of course, most recently, at the 2015 national elections, Kofi Annan came and joined me in chairing the workshop that produced the Abuja Accord, which committed the presidential candidates, all of them, including the incumbent president, Jonathan, and the aspirants that included General Buhari, as he then was, to commit themselves to violence-free campaign, and more importantly, to accepting the results of the elections. So,
if I may come in here, my apologies. If I may just come in here, because you've had a long-standing relationship with him, one that is most commendable for that matter. But how soon do you see another leader of his caliber at that global body emerging from Africa? Is it probable?
Well, it's not going to be easy to replicate Kofi Annan in New York at the United Nations, because he rose from the ranks of the United Nations to get to the top of the organization as Secretary General. There are not many Africans waiting for that sort of position, but of course, Africa has very promising younger diplomats who will, I am sure, in due course, attain the highest offices, both at the United Nations and at the Commonwealth, which so far I have been the only African Secretary General.
Now, he was also credited, as you said, with being sort of the brainchild for the Millennium Development Goals, as he was also credited with some of the most remarkable changes in the United Nations, compelling the US, for instance, to pay a backlog of debts owed the organization and raising funds for a number of United Nations projects. But there were a few hiccups in his career also, like the invasion of Iraq and the genocide in Rwanda, both of which were acknowledged by the United Nations. Now, how much did all this impact on his achievements?
No, I think that in Iraq, for example, it was known that he advised against the invasion of Iraq by the United States and United Kingdom. He was one leader who called the invasion illegal. That was to his credit. In Rwanda, he was, at the time of the Rwanda genocide, the Under-Secretary General and head of the DPKO, the United Nations Department for Peacekeeping Operations. Well, he himself subsequently admitted that he could have done more at the time to...
Chief, I'm afraid that that's the much we can have with you at this very auspicious time. We do sincerely thank you for sharing your thoughts on this rather unfortunate and difficult demise of the United Nations, former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. Chief Emeka Anyaoku, many thanks indeed.